Hey everybody, it's Chris at the GME, and today I want to talk to you about one of my best product lines, Games Workshop. We have over 200 paints in stock here at all times. The new line of contrast paints looks awesome. So I've had a friend of mine, Shawn Allison. He's a great painter, and he's going to walk you through how you can paint up a model in an hour. So I'll leave it over to him.
What we did today, we did up just a single model just to test out some contrast paints. I started off with a white primed model here. That can either be a brush or a spray primer, but for contrast especially, it's nice to use a white paint. Contrast sits on top of the white paint very nicely to give you the richest colors that you can possibly do. The colors we've used today, I've got a Talisar blue, we've got Blood Angels red, we have Iandan yellow, Skeleton Horde, just for a small bit, and Aethermatic blue. Those are the colors we've used, and then I've used one shade today, which is the Agrax Earth shade. Okay, so there, I'm shaking up the contrast paint. Not all of them have a sediment, but some of them do. You'll see on the bottom there, I'm pointing you where you'll see it. Just give it a nice good shake until that sediment is nice and mixed up. But most of them are not that kind of thick. They'll be a nice shake and be good to go. Open it carefully. You don't want to spill them. I would recommend some type of holder for it. And there you can see this paint is very, very juicy. It is very liquid paint and is not a chunky paint. So we'll just grab up a brush here. I've got a couple different ones that you can use. A standard layer brush, one of the GW brushes is good for that, but most acrylic brushes will be good for this kind of work. So here I'm placing on the basic blue. I've decided that most of the armor is going to be blue, and we're going to leave some pieces clear to do some detail work afterwards, but most of the armor is going to be blue. We're just going to go in there, paint with a decent amount of paint. You don't want to use too little unless you want a very light coating. Generally for a contrast paint you get a good kind of a blob of it on there, and then you can place it on the model and kind of push it around. It's very, very easy to move the paint around on the models themselves. So I'm just touching up all of the blue here, going in with just little bits of detail. I will eventually clean off the brush here. You want to clean off your brush periodically. You don't want to let it build up. Even with a contrast paint, as thin as it is, eventually if you just paint and paint and paint, the paint will get up inside the ferrule, that metal part of the paintbrush, and that will eventually kill your brushes. So try to keep them as clean as you can while you're working. If you have to clean them off 5 times, overall that will save the life of your brush. This part is not going to be super exciting. This is cleaning off all of the rest of the blue on the model here, going in and making sure it fills in all the details. There should be a spot here where you can see some of the details and how the paint will sit inside those details. It will color the main parts of the model, the flat pieces, but the color will also go inside all the little grooves and details. Most regular paint will leave you a flat coating, but the contrast paint will actually bring you, well, contrast. It will give you darker recesses and lighter, flatter parts. Okay, I'm just pointing out there how we would use the paint itself. I generally don't like to dip directly into the pot because sometimes you cannot see how far you can reach into that pot of paint. I'll generally shake it and use the top of the lid to grab small amounts of paint to use. Finishing up some more blue here. There's quite a bit of blue on this model since we didn't want to do an excessively detailed piece of work today. So most of the model is going to be blue. Once that's completed, then we'll be moving on to red parts of the model. Sometimes this paint will pull away from specific edges. If you've got a huge blob on there, it may, if the corner is very, very tiny, you may see after it dries, it may leave a little spot where the paint has not set. You can always just go in quite easily after that and touch those little areas up. But once in a while you will see this with that paint, just due to the way that the medium of the paint works. Okay, we're going to skip ahead in a few places here, so if you see the camera work look choppy, that is only due to the editing. We are just moving ahead to the next part. Alright, here you can see we have moved on to the red parts of the model here. I've just switched out the colors, cleaned the brush with some water, and then gone in. These paints clean up fairly nicely. Even though the colors are fairly dark, they do clean out of the brushes pretty quickly, and they don't cross-contaminate the colors too bad. So we'll see here, I'm adding on some red pieces here. I'm not being ultra careful with this paint because once we get to the final stage, you can clean up those little errors. So don't ever worry that oh no, I've made this one little mistake, I can never fix it. You can always come back and fix any little errors that you've got. That's never a problem. I am detailing the red parts here. I'm going in with the same brush I've been using. I have not switched the brushes one time during this. It's just a one brush trick in case if you only have the one brush, that's fine. That's all you really need. You can see how I am painting out of the top of the bottle here. I'll bring that up for a second. You want to be careful with these because of how juicy the paint is. When you open that, get a good grip, pull it slowly. If it's new, there are little tabs on here, so you want to pull that and not throw your paint everywhere. But after you've shaken it, you'll pop it open and you'll see in the lid there's a little scoop there. If you fold it out about this far, it takes a little bending, but when it's folded out this far, the extra paint will sit here. You can dab your brushes from there, and then also the extra will go back down inside the bottle. If it's a little too far, you'll bleed paint kind of all over, and if it's too close in like this, this is where you're asking to spill the paint. So you want to be a little bit careful with these lids, but I definitely like to work out of the top of the lid instead of dunking the paintbrush all the way down into the bottom of the pot. You might get too much paint on your brush that way. Okay, the brushes themselves, I've used many different kinds. The GW brushes are perfectly fine for this kind of work. You want to make sure that you are not putting too much paint on your brushes, and you don't want to kind of force the brush onto the model and push the paint onto the model itself. You want to bring the paint and kind of pull it onto the model from the brush away from there. You can see kind of dragging it on. And once the paint gets on there, the contrast paint itself, it's due to the medium, it's kind of a juicy paint, but it will also sit where you place it. If you place a blob of this paint on a particular model, it will generally stay where it is, and then you can move it around. If you need to get close to a detail part, then you're not comfortable with your own detail work, you can get that paint near that spot and kind of push it near that detail. I've got a trick here that I've been using. Instead of using metal paints, I'm just using a dark yellow, the Yandan yellow that we've got here that I pulled up. This egg color turns a nice golden with at least one coat. So I've been using this as a metal replacement. Metal paints themselves, they have actual little flakes in them to replicate the metal shine, but they can be tricky to work with. So if you want the look of metal, but you don't want to use an advanced technique, you can use a darker color that's close to the metal that you want. I find that this dark yellow makes a very nice gold. It gives a good effect without having to use metal paints themselves. So we're just trying to pull up as much kind of detail as we can with as little tools as possible so that you can do something fancy with not having to use all kinds of fancy different things. You'll find little errors. Don't ever get discouraged with them. You can always go back and fix those. If you want to, you can paint a little bit of ivory over a spot. If you feel you've really made a mess of a spot and it just doesn't look how you want, you can use some white paint or some ivory paint to just go in there and touch that up and then put over the color that you want. But here what I'm doing is actually placing on some shadows instead. I'm using the Agrex Earth Shade. This is a shade. It works similar to a contrast, but it has less color in it. So it's more like a film that you would put over something to add a whole color to. I tend to use the Agrex Earth Shade for shadows themselves, so I'm painting them underneath the bottoms of most of the pieces here. So you'll see me going in between the legs and around the feet, underneath some of the parts, just a little bit. And then especially what I've done here is add some shadow to his huge wings on his chest there. The gold gave a nice contrast itself between a light yellow and a dark yellow, and then to put some darker brown onto the chest piece really makes the wings have some contrast, so you get some very nice shadows inside the feather areas. So that's always something you can do if you don't feel that there's enough jump to the piece. You can use a little bit of shades to add that kind of extra contrast. If the contrast, or if you're using just a regular paint that's not a contrast, you can add that extra bit with a shade. Okay, so you can see here, this little guy took around an hour to do, but he's now a decent tabletop standard. He's got the multiple colors that you need to kind of, for official tournaments, they want you to have at least 3 colors. So he's tournament official now. He's got his red and blue and yellow and even a little bit of other colors for his details. You can see he's got some nice shadows from the contrast and the Agrax Earth Shade, which just added a little bit of depth. If you can take a look at the wings there, you can see how there's the bright parts to the front, and then the colors have sat inside the recesses to really make that detail pop. So thanks for watching. I hope you picked up some tips and tricks and at least some interest here. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.
So I just want to say thanks to Shawn Allison for that amazing tutorial. You can do that yourself in an hour with the paints we have here. The GME is here for all your gaming needs, comic books, board games, anything you want, so stop by.